Now, today I want to talk about Alzheimer's disease. I want to talk about, let's see here, MS, multiple sclerosis, and osteoporosis of the skull. Now, there's no rule that says you can't have all three of those at the same time, which is probably very common, okay? And Alzheimer's disease is a physician-caused disease. It didn't occur until they came out with statin drugs to lower your cholesterol, and you started getting demyelinization, of the brain, myelin and spinal cord myelin and so forth, getting memory problems. And then, of course, MS, the same way. It's a myelin deficiency disease causing short-circuiting of all the nerves. And then osteoporosis of the skull squeezes the nerves. There's 12 pairs of cranial nerves in the spinal cord, all of which go through tunnels in the skull to the outside to do their job. And so there's no rule that says you can't have all three of those at the same time. AFib, atrial fibrillation, tachycardia, fast heart rate, bradycardia, slow heart rate, those are not heart issues, actually. Those are actually caused by osteoporosis of the skull squeezing the 10th cranial nerve, the biggest nerve. And COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, is also caused by squeezing of that 10th cranial nerve, reflux, bloating, and gastroparesis are due to a squeezing of that 10th cranial nerve, because the 10th cranial nerve goes all the way down into your stomach. And, doctors want to put tubes down your throat to see if you have hernias, they want to see if you have ulcers and all that kind of stuff. But it's really just osteoporosis of the skull. And then you can get diarrhea. One of the things that goes along with all three of those, osteoporosis of the skull, you're looking at MS and Alzheimer's disease, is diarrhea. Because when you have these things, invariably people are on a high gluten diet. They're eating lots of wheat, bread, and oats, pancakes, flour tortillas, drinking beer, that kind of stuff. And so they have a gluten issue, and that's involved there. Hiccups, it's a recurrent nerve. It's a branch of the 10th cranial nerve being squeezed. It's attached to your diaphragm, makes your diaphragm work, and so you get hiccups when that gets squeezed. Bell's palsy, the 7th cranial nerve, the facial nerve gets squeezed, and one side of your face droops. It's rarely both sides at the same time. ONA, optic nerve atrophy. Optic artery and optic vein gets squeezed. That's the 2nd cranial nerve being squeezed by the skull when you have osteoporosis of the skull. Vertigo is the vestibular branch of the 8th cranial nerve being squeezed. Vertigo is kind of like a balance or dizziness problem. Meniere's disease and tinnitus. Vertigo and Meniere's disease are the same. Meniere's disease is just a French name for vertigo. Tinnitus, ringing in the ears, is the auditory branch of the 8th cranial nerve being squeezed. And then there's the glossopharyngeal nerve, the 9th cranial nerve being squeezed, and you have trouble with your speech. You're losing your speech. And also, people get an accumulation of mucus and they're constantly clearing their throat because that nerve, the 9th cranial nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, controls how your throat works. And normally, you're producing mucus constantly in your mouth, kind of like saliva, just producing it all the time. And unbeknownst to you, you're quietly swallowing all that mucus going down in the stomach, blah, 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 blah. Okay? And so this is very common. Okay, again, that's the 9th cranial nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve. Paget's disease, when your skull goes from being a quarter of an inch thick to an abnormal 1 inch to 2 inches thick, and all those tunnels that the 12 pairs of cranial nerves and the spinal cord go through lose about 75% of their inside diameter, putting pressure on the nerves and the spinal cord. Trigeminal neuralgia is the 5th cranial nerve, the trigeminal nerve, the 5th cranial nerve being squeezed. You get pain behind the eyes, terrible headaches, and so forth. And then the spinal cord goes out of the foramen magnum, the big hole, which in Latin is big hole is foramen magnum. And the spinal cord is made in the brain and goes out of that foramen magnum down your back and so forth. And you get all kinds of stuff, when you have that. You get low back pain. You get up 10 times a night to urinate, and you get what's called, diabetes insipidus, diabetes insipidus, where you're producing 20 quarts of urine a day, especially it goes up at night when you're urinating 6, 8, 10 times a night. And that's because the spinal cord is being squeezed as it's coming out of the skull. And the nerves that control the urinary bladder are being impinged upon and impacted. And then, of course, you have all kinds of stuff going on south, peripheral neuropathies in your legs and your hands and fingers, trigger fingers, things like carpal tunnel syndrome, all that kind of stuff. And so this is all, it's all in your head. All these things are going on in your head, and we're talking about 25 different diseases here, okay? And so, and doctors will refer you to their classmates, their brothers and sisters, or mom and dad who are doctors or nurse practitioners and so forth, because they're specializing in psychiatry and neurological diseases and dentistry